I'm Alexander Xander Smith. I do a lot of stuff with machine learning ops these days and DevOps. I also do Erlang, Zymurgy, brewing my own beer, that sort of thing. But we're here to talk about Vim, so I'm going to flip back to that. So Vim, basically the whole talk here is we're going to talk about Vim, the text editor, and a bit about VI, its predecessor, and some of the advantages and complications that come from it and why you should probably be using it. Even if it's not always something you constantly use, it's a good tool to have. This should take about 15 minutes. I'll have 5 minutes for Q&A. And then also the PowerPoint's pretty basic. We're here for content, so I made it very simple. So it should be fine. Let me get my stopwatch running there. All right. So, as I mentioned, it's pretty Spartan. Did I have ChatGPT just write this up for me last night? No. I had Claude do it. Come on, what do you take me for? All right, bad joke out of the way, A for the speech. Let's get started. So Vim, created in 1991 by Bram Molenaar, same as the Linux kernel from Linus Torvalds. It's lightweight, fast, and always available. So in a lot of cases, VI and Vim are both going to take up about 12 megabytes of actual RAM compared to all your other IDEs. And usually if you hop on a system that's not an Alpine base, because that's super small, it's already going to be installed for you. All you have to do is pop into the terminal and type in VI or VIM. In a lot of cases that pops up, or at the very least it'll tell you how to get it very quickly. Near universal support across an awful lot of platforms. If you're in Linux or Windows or Unix or a lot of these other things, you can find a copy of VI and install it or compile it from source if you need to. So it's very available, and that's one of the things that makes it very helpful is you don't have to worry about other things as much. There is some licensing, but you don't have to go drop $80 for it like Sublime Text. And then also it's a power tool for experienced developers. If you're very capable with Vim, it can do an awful lot of things for you very quickly. So Vim runs directly in the terminal, which is always an advantage. I don't have to worry about adding an X11 or anything else. Also, there's no dependencies on any graphical environments. You're not dealing with VS Code, Sublime, Electron systems, Atom, etc. No JavaScript, as I always like to bang on JavaScript because it always clunks for me and tends to be slow. I know a lot of people love it, so feel free to. There's always advantages and disadvantages of these different things. No HTTP involved unless you really want to do that. You could put it in. No WebSockets, just like any other Atom or Electron based, we're still doing a lot of WebSockets and other information there. So Vim is ideal for your remote and headless systems, things that you want to log into, or even containers that have no SSH whatsoever. Your ability to just use it from any terminal allows you to be able to just jump right in, edit code, edit information, edit config stuff, and be able to move on with your day. So, as mentioned, already installed, uses very little memory, so this is where I'm going to go into statistics. So, typically you have about a 6 meg file for VM, about XML typically, and VIM will take up 12 megabytes of RAM, whereas VS Code takes 493 megabytes to display that same file. So that's a huge order of magnitude there. Yes, VS Code is going to give you all the bells and whistles. Vim is going to give you exactly what you need in order to edit this and then move on. Uses very little memory, but also very little bloat. We're not having a bunch of colors on the screen, especially if you're using VI, where it basically gets rid of all the overlays for you. And then you don't have to worry about options you didn't think you needed, or key combinations that you didn't want to bother with. Emacs is, of course, notorious for having the problem that you can press all sorts of different buttons and completely mess up your document. Whereas as Vim, you're probably going to mess up a few little things, but it'll kick you back into command mode before you do too many things. And then, command lines rather than key combinations. I'm a big command line guy. I don't always like having mice. They are an extreme add-on to dealing with all the complexity that you already have with this computer system. And so with Vim, you're just simply on the keyboard all the time, being able to flip back and forth between what commands you want to do. You don't have to memorize weird key combinations. You don't need 11 fingers like you do with Emacs or the pedals that you have to add on to your computer in order to do crazy combinations with Emacs. And so you just type in real quick commands to do that. Nano is, of course, a reasonable alternative if you're just editing like ETFstab or something like that. Nano is really handy because you can just pop into it, do the basic edit, and then click out. Nano definitely is a reasonably small amount. Nano is actually a little smaller than Vim whenever even run or the actual package. But on top of that, it also is very available just like Vim. So it's a reasonable alternative. But handy to know. Vim gives you more power tools and the ability to do things. Even the simplest things on Nano, like copying 5 lines, can be difficult to do very quickly, whereas with Vim, it's just yank, yank 5. So why 5? All right, the problem is Vim has a fun learning curve. So this is the Stack Overflow for how do I exit Vim, and it is, had 3.2 million views in 12 years. So that means that every year, 250,000 people have to ask how to exit Vim. That's how hard it is. You just can't quit Vim. It's like that for you. So it definitely has a learning curve. There's always more to learn. You can always do cool things with it. But at the same time, once you get the basics down, it's very useful. We'll talk about how to get into Vim in just a minute here with some fun tools. So this is where I come in, is usually I do a lot of container workflows and other things. And one of the other problems is, well, we're not great at containers where I've been, and previously at United Healthcare and Whole Foods. We tend to make really big containers that need to run constantly and they're more pets than cattle. And so the problem is you have to pop into them using the terminal and make changes when you don't have the ability to even upload files in a lot of cases, or the file's being used and you need a blue-green deployment and deploy it really quickly. And so this is where Vim is really great, is you can just pop into the terminal. You don't even need SSH for it, just using a Docker container, Rocket container terminal. You can do interactive terminals and use Vim directly there, very close to Metal, or as close to Metal as we get with software. And makes it a much easier thing to do. It's very text friendly. You're literally doing line by line text editing as opposed to using your mouse to try to move through a bunch of different information or select stuff. So I find Vim's really helpful for infrastructure engineers, but also database stuff. Anyone who works with JSON config files can be really handy to be able to deal with a lot of that boilerplate. Vim still does overlay a lot of stuff for you, so you can have it outlay what is a JSON file, what's it look like, where are the brackets, what colors do you want them to be in, how do you want to look at this without necessarily having a huge backend that takes up half a gig of RAM at least. Because as we all know, VS Code's fun, but it likes to eat RAM. So ideally for small containers, so my preferred method of doing these things is usually using something like BusyBox, Alpine, and Debian Slim, so those are all really small containers. Typically a Red Hat installation, even the Red Hat Slim, is going to be 150 megabytes. So again, orders of magnitude, those are 10 times bigger than the smallest container you can have. And with small containers, you can just literally run one per request if you need to. No longer do you have to run 10,000 requests on one system. You can have it where the container literally just goes away after it finishes the one request, and have this very easy to work with swarm that you can really track well and also understand what versions you're running for each one of these. Large files. So I know Vim does load the entire file. That's one of its major failings. If you're loading like a huge 100 megabyte file, it's going to clunk. But it does usually handle pretty big files with these just because it is relatively small. Again, 6 megabyte to 50 megabyte file typically takes up about double that in RAM, which is a lot easier than VS Code, which is going to take large amounts of RAM and then also clunk along as it tries to pull up part of the file. So advantage, you're trying to load the whole thing at the start. Disadvantage, it takes a while to load if you're doing that, or it can have problems with certain size of files. As you get to bigger files, you should be truncating them anyway, but that's a discussion for another time. Keeps the whole system responsive. So Vim has the advantage that it's constantly updating to the terminal and constantly doing it in a way that we've been doing for 30 plus years. We know the Unix terminal. This whole thing's based on Telex, which is as a system that has the worst connections as possible. And then even a 56K modem, you can still use an SSH connection, have Vim constantly respond to you and constantly update for you. Emacs starts to clunk when you try to do that. It also would like an X11 connection or something else. That's a much larger background. Vim just connects and tends to work. All right, when do you not want to use Vim? So one thing I will admit is Vim is not the most fully featured IDE. It has the problem that it has not all the features and not as many people are necessarily developing for it. VS Code has certainly taken this area over, though you can also use VS Code with Vim in it. So if you want kind of the best of both worlds without having to worry about RAM at least, that's the one thing. And you can do that. Heavy GUI workflows. So if your team has a bunch of things, including stuff like Datadog and so forth, you're not going to get a whole lot of benefit seeing that in text because that's in text. You're going to have anything that has a lot of graphics in some way, you probably want to flip to a web app for that, and that's going to be easier to work with. And then cutting edge language support. And yeah, Vim does best with C, does best with Java, does best with things that are older, just because it is older and its heyday was when we were seeing a lot of text terminals still and command line stuff. And so it is great with that. It's not always great with whatever we're throwing out that's the new hotness. It does okay with Go, but Rust right now is certainly lower support, but much less than it is in VS Code. And God forbid you want something like Terraform support. It will do some of the JSON config information, but it doesn't always understand what Terraform is doing or what a command is, where it starts with the template, etc. All right, the other thing you should consider is what's your learning curve for the team. So it's all well and good for me to stand up here and tell you all that Vim's going to be the next savior of everything and be an absolute panacea for you. But the reality is there's a significant learning curve. You do need to talk to your team, make sure they understand why this is a handy tool, as opposed to necessarily the one thing you want to use as end all and be all. And then, yeah, a lot of times you want to standardize your IDE configurations across the board, and that tends to be something that VS Code does a bit better, or Sublime or Atom are all better at that than Vim usually is. And there can be some conflicts with how we want to customize things. If you have a lot of linters or something very specific to your team, you probably want to use something that's more individualizable. All right, so as mentioned, and Vim has a few downsides. Here's how to survive them. So we do have that steep learning curve. So there are a couple ways you can do this. Vim Tutor comes with a lot of distros. You can just literally pop into Vim Tutor by typing it on the command line and go through the entire tutorial in order to understand what you're doing. Vim Adventures is one of my favorites. So it's basically a little online game that teaches you Vim and how to move around and do things within that, as well as also how to issue commands, what commands do what. And then there's also Learn Vim Script the Hard Way. I'm a big fan of the Hard Way books just because they do require you to sit there and kind of rote memory, type out these exact commands and do all these different things until you have a bit of a muscle memory for what you're actually doing with these different programs. I definitely enjoyed Learn Python the Hard Way and Learn C the Hard Way. Those really were helpful. All right, so as mentioned, Vim, lightweight, fast, ideal for remote work, containers, low resource systems. It's available almost everywhere. It's probably already installed with whatever you pull up. And then, yeah, efficient editing model tends to be modal editing, which is able to move through and page through these things pretty easily. Simple commands once you know them. It's extensible. You can add a large variety of linters, changes, and other things. But it's not always the right tool. You have the problem that, yeah, it has a bit of learning curve, and you want to make sure your team buys in well. All right, question and answers.